Hello, my name is Vic Gilgis, and I'm here to hopefully help you with your well-being, and also I'm doing it because I think it helps me with mine. This is podcast episode 35. Do we get help from the universe? Well, it's a bit of a woo-woo topic, this. I'll try my best to make it practical, because what I mean is there is a lot of talk about the wisdom coming not from our thinking but from universal energy. And so if that is the case, if wisdom does come from the universe, then that's wow, that is unbelievable. Just think about it. It means that the universe has got our back, that we will be shown wisdom, that can give us confidence. We don't need to have troubles with self-esteem because we'll get to know what to do. We will be guided, etc., etc. So it's like wonderful news if that is the case. And what I want to do is give, as best as I can, my explanation of what I think around this, the do's and the don'ts of all this. And so what I did was I looked at some research papers, and I made use of artificial intelligence. And that seemed to show to me that at the subatomic level, so you're talking about minute particles, smaller than the atom, that there is a transfer of knowing. That when one thing at that subatomic level is altered, then there is a corresponding alteration of something similar at a distance, so they're not like directly joined together, and that communication, when one is altered, the other becomes altered instantaneously, not even at the speed of light. So the research seems to say at that level. In other words, it's not so with sentient things that are alive like us, that there is such type of communication. Now, the gurus from the East, philosophers, the three principles, when you look at the Buddhists, and it is said from the research that I looked at that these are beliefs. They're not necessarily true. But there is, as I will go on to attempt to explain, there is something in this that perhaps has substance, that there is a reality. And I'm not saying that I'm not quite sure. I can only present you with what I feel and understand and know to be true. And certainly in the three principles, the inside out philosophy, then Signe Banks said there is an intelligent life energy which informs us, which provides wisdom. So, give you a little story here. I mean, so the yeses are the pros and the cons on this. At the time, what was very important to me years ago was me getting my PhD. And at the time, minutes prior to me being vivaed for my PhD, my supervisor came through And it seemed to indicate that things were not going to be plain sailing for me. Not that I expected them to, but I got the message wrong, really. It was a signal, like thumbs up or like that. And I definitely read the signal wrong from my supervisor. So when I went into the room to be vivaed, and I can't remember how many people there, 4 or 5 senior academics, all ready to grill me, that what I immediately did was, they said sit down and, ready when you are to please explain what your PhD thesis is all about. I didn't do that. Instead of starting with the request to get going on it, I just said, could we pause for a drink? I'd seen some squash and what have you on a cabinet at the side and some water. And I just pointed to it and said, could we first just kind of have a little bit of, something for me to drink, some water, and you, can we do that first? And they all looked immediately puzzled. And then somebody said, oh, okay, yes. And that's what we did. Now, in actual fact, I'm looking back on this in hindsight because that just came out of my mouth. I hadn't planned to do that, but it was one of the best things that I could have done because, again, in retrospect, I realised that it had settled the room, it had settled me, and it had settled them. And now, did I do this because I was reading the room? Or did I do this because of some wisdom from the universe that had just popped into my head, which had said to me, do this, ask for a brief break before we start? Now, I don't know. But the only reason I bring that up is because it was involuntary. It just spontaneous. It happened. I hadn't planned to do that. And it worked in my favour. So was it just my mind thinking this was the best thing to do? Or was it some knowing that said this is the best thing to do? I don't know to this day. But because I have got that kind of inquiry in my mind, I think there is something there. I think there is something bigger than the mind. So that's why I say that. Now, I can give 2 examples here of communication at a distance, and they both involve my father. Many years ago, and so I'm talking about, well, anyway, my father was accused of a crime, stealing money, which he hadn't done, but the police were convinced that he had. In fact, he spent the weekend locked up, but they released him pending further evidence. And the local paper picked up on it. The family, meaning me and my mother and father and my 2 brothers who were around at the time, it was awful because people were pointing the finger and saying, oh, your dad's a thief, blah, 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 because it had got in the papers. And on one occasion, well, this is the story that I'm telling you, is I was sat, my brother had just come round to commiserate with my father about all his suffering over this, about being accused. And in actual fact, at the time, my eldest brother, did say to me, Father, look, Dad, admit it if you did take the money. And my dad just looked at him and said, don't insult me. I wouldn't do such a thing. And so everybody's a bit upset about that. Anyway, I think that's why my brother left early, leaving me. I was home at the time, before I got married, and my mother and my father. And we were like gloomily staring into the fire. It was a little room, a scullery we called it, with a fireplace. And I was just thinking, oh, dearie me, this is terrible. This had been going on for a couple of weeks. And my mother, had the blues over it all. And my dad had his head down. And all of a sudden, my dad looked up and said, I'm in the clear. And I thought, what? You know, it was like an Abbott and Costello movie where they've been put in that dungeon, and there's a madman in the corner, and there's a pillar in the middle of the dungeon, and the madman stands up and says to Abbott and Costello, "I found a way out of this dungeon, follow me." And what he does is he walks around the pillar twice and said, "I'm free." And Abbott and Costello just look at each other and say, "He's mad." And that's what popped into my mind at the time. I thought, he's gone mad. But in actual fact, what happened was there was a policeman's knock on the door. And my mother opened the door. And actually, the copper didn't come in and he didn't apologise. It just said, the person who actually stole the money has been caught. And so your husband is in the clear. All charges have been dropped. Now, I was there when this happened. Now, whether or not it was coincidence that my father knew, or, you know, in other words, it kind of thought, well, by now I would have been, you know, arrested. I don't know. But that kind of, that just registered with me. I mean, there's a few things in my life that have actually stood out, and this is one of them. Because I just could not give an explanation as to why my father knew. And I said to him, you know, what's going on, Dad? And he just said, I just knew. I got this feeling, I got this sense that I was in the clear. So there you are. Does had the universe informed my father? Or was it some mind thought that put two and two together to conclude that he was in the clear? I don't know. The second, and as I say this, I could count them on one hand, the weird things that have happened to me in my life that thinking, well, how did that happen? Where did that come from? And the second one was, I was a student at Cranfield Institute of Technology at the time. It was the 1970s. Now, my father was approaching, he was 68 years of age. 68 years of age. And he'd had some illnesses, but nothing serious. Not really serious. In other words, his death was not imminent. And this particular day, I just wasn't. I had some homework to do that had been given me by one of the lecturers. I had this, that, and the other. I was a student doing a master's. And I was a bit of a swot. When I say swot, I'd been in industry prior to that, so I was used to getting things done. And I appreciated being a student. If I was given some work, I got on with it because that's what I was used to doing. And this particular day, I just couldn't be bothered. I was not interested. My heart wasn't in it at all. And all day long, and my wife said to me, "What's the matter with you?" I said, I'm fed up. I don't know what to do. And so it went on. And eventually the day passed, well, nearly passed, and we went to bed. And there was a knock on the door, and it was the warden of the college had come round. And, my father had died. He told me. And now that I seemed to know that something was wrong. I don't know. And it may have just been a coincidence. There may have been something in my mind saying, well, you know, your dad's not a youngster, but he certainly, you know, had more years in him. And he hadn't been that ill that you would have expected him to have died. But he did. And that particular day, I was really out of sorts, despite my wife and other people trying to G me up. Where did that come from? Was it from my mind, my subconscious, putting two and two together? Or was it intelligent energy letting me know? I just don't know. So, when we look at the mind, going back to what the mind can do, so we're talking about Well, I'll tell you another little story is that at the Wellbeing Centre that I go to, there is one of the managers there, a young lady, very nice. And I started talking to her about the three principles and the use of the mind, and explaining that we all live in a thought-created reality. And she, I saw her the next week, and she kind of had sprung into life, and like she'd changed. And she came up to me and she said, "Vic, thank you very much." And I said, "What for?" She said, "Well, some stuff that you've said have really opened my mind." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I have a friend, and a so-called friend," as she went on to explain. And she said, "Our relationship had not been too good. And so," she said, "what I did, I decided to write a letter explaining to her how I felt about this, that and t'other, because I thought that I needed to clear the air, because this had been on my mind and I didn't want our friendship to suffer as a result of any, kind of bad vibes." Anyway, so she wrote this letter and sent it to her friend. And her friend, I don't know whether she replied back in by writing or verbally, just more or less said, "Well, I knew it was like that, and I don't give a shit anyway," type of thing. And she said, "I was really surprised." In other words, a friend had said, "Well, I'm not really a friend, and I don't give a monkey's what you think about our relationship, because I don't care." And so what this young lady was saying to me was that her psychology had basically put a wrapper around some thoughts and presented it to her, saying this was an issue that she needed to resolve because it worried her, when in actual fact it was not. It was just a mind had put her a wrapper around some of her thoughts and said, "Here's your problem. It needs to be sorted." When in actual fact she said to me, "I realised through your talk around the three principles, the inside-out understanding, that I no needed to have gone through these stories in my mind, because it was just my mind. It wasn't reality. It was all made up by myself. I was having a kind of a, a session on make-believe." So that is kind of looking at what the mind can tell us that the principles shows to us to give some space to back away from. Now, if we look at what we are as sentient beings, then if we look at it, one way of, I think we can look at it, is that energy, full stop, from the word go, which created subatomic particles and atoms and then elements and then and it became more complex and resulted as sentient beings like us. Well, is that the epitaph? Is that the conclusion? Is that the potential that we've got? Is that we are an evolved thinking being which originated from some spark of creation in the first place, that we've come to this stage where we're at now, and we are able to do in a way our best thinking because we are evolved beings. Now, what I'm saying there is this something that is in the design of life to enable from that seed potential of creation from energy into us thinking animals? Is that part of a grand plan of creation that we evolve like that? In other words, was the seed planted right in the beginning? Because if that is so, you would or I might conclude that it's all fatalistic, that there is a plan and we are part of the plan. So we, despite free will, we're carried along on this flow of life. Is that the case? Or is it the case that we are in charge of our destiny in the moment, in the now, by the ability of using our prefrontal cortex, our intelligent level of thinking, to be able to make decisions and evolve? And I will put a caveat on that if we look at thinking, then because we have a psychology, and I agree with a lot of what is said on this, is that if we look at knowing that we've got our psychology which can pollute our consciousness, in other words, consciousness, awareness is life and knows what to do, but sometimes there is a spanner in the works because our psychologist thinks around stuff too much and says, no, don't do that, do this, and interferes. In other words, we start to worry, we lose confidence, we have low self-esteem. In other words, our system of life is enclosed or made narrow by the fact that we have psychology of thought. In other words, conditioning, upbringing, memories and all the rest of it, and what our parents did, and our what's in our genes and all the rest of it. So I am looking at the either that or a bit of both. And so what I do realise from all this is that we should never let the thinking mind be the master. That when we kind of know how we tick and know how we can be our own worst enemy by thinking wrongly, that there is and listen more to our wisdom. And I suppose what I'm saying is that because this is clean thought, in other words, the wisdom comes from clean thought, and not so good development comes from contaminated thought, or is it the issue that always in the background is our awareness informed by wisdom which comes from the universe? So that's the question. Now, a book on this is that I read recently, and I mentioned it before, is Sailor Bob Adamson is the author, now deceased, and the book is called What's Wrong with Right Now If You Don't Think About It. And so what Bob Adamson is referring to a lot there is the use of the I that we think we are, our personality, our psychology, and saying, no, we are the awareness that is aware of that I, and so that I is not us, we are greater than that. And I can put that quite straightforward into better use of the mind. Bob Adamson, I kind of glean, is that he is saying, no, this awareness is oneness, non-duality, and oneness has all the properties of being godlike, being universal energy, being universal intelligence, which may be the case, I don't know. Now, the thing about duality, and it is mentioned in his book, but I've talked about it elsewhere, is that what duality always does, and it is a property of the mind, is that if we see this as good, we also see that as bad. If we see this as this is what we want, then we see that as that's what we don't want. Or even if this is what we want, we may see something better, and then we want. So in other words, for every this, there is a that, which kind of poses a kind of a conflict in our mind that makes us unhappy and makes us strive to be more. Now, what non-duality is saying is, well, no, there isn't a duality. We're all oneness. We're all the same. Now, how can I put it? The way I look at it is that, yeah, we're all the same in terms of the elements that we're made up from, the atomic structures that we're made up from, and this frame that we're in, this boundaries that we're in, it doesn't really separate us from another human being. They are still part of a field of energy, and therefore we are linked. Therefore there is oneness, and in that oneness, which is there is no other greater than, because it is life, it is knowing, it is God, it is what is. And because we don't understand what that is, but all that we do know is that non-duality is just this oneness that is always present in the now, always powerful and always wise. Or is it that we have, as sentient beings, evolved to be capable of doing that? In other words, does awareness just know what to do? Or is our mind capable of knowing itself, or us knowing how our mind ticks, to be aware of what to do for the best? And if we look at Jamie Smart, the author of a book called Clarity, he has a formula which is consciousness equals conscious. Let me get this right. Clarity equals consciousness minus contamination. Now, what Jamie Smart is talking about there is that clarity is knowing what to do. So this is what, when we get help from the universe, a kind of approach is we get to know what to do, because the universe informs us. It gives us the wisdom. It always is there in the now. It's always in the background. It is stable. It is all-knowing. And what Jamie Smart's formula says is that clarity, that type of clarity, is equal to our awareness, but our awareness can be diminished by the contamination of our psychology. So it still doesn't necessarily answer the question there. I always think of the 100th monkey example. I don't know how true this is, but it is said that all of a sudden one particular monkey understood what to do and did it. Maybe he used a tool, or I don't know, communicated in a different way. And another monkey saw it and copied it and learnt it. But it didn't come until a particular time when we were, it was in the water, in the air. All of a sudden, the time was ready in life for this to happen. Now, I can think of examples in the past where we have had people stride this earth. Jesus was totally aware. We get the Eastern gurus and philosophers that are aware. The Eastern gurus talking about non-duality, about awareness, all-knowing energy. Sydney Banks was aware. All of a sudden became aware of the fact that there is something more than thought going on, and that we need to understand how we tick. And so when we look at this, we are getting into a state of the world should be getting better. Either way, but it is not. We have got examples of Israel and Gaza still let's hoping that's resolved, but it's been going on for donkeys. We have got Russia and Ukraine going on. There's conflicts all over the world. Nobody seems to be cracking this. And, we are awaiting this wisdom. Now, if we look at this, could we say that people like Hitler, zealots that we know, Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin, what we might say as evil people wanting division and warfare and destruction, that they are there as a counterbalance to make us aware of what is wrong, so that we learn the hard way and evolve. And therefore, because of this duality situation, we get to know what to do better, because we don't want this, we want that. Or, is there a grand plan of evolving just through this intelligent energy, which is love, because it wants to thrive, it wants to enhance. It is full of love for its succession, and it is helping when there is things that are going wrong, so that we can thrive. So there is compassion, there is care, there is help. And so the seed is there. Was that seed in the grand plan, or is it that we are evolving? Was it seeded in the beginning? So are we tied up with fate? In other words, there is a plan that is there in the beginning for us to develop. And so are we, in a way, misguided sinners coming on the way to clarity and purpose and intention? I don't know. There is a lot in this. And I think I've tried to give you some clues there as to there is certainly something bigger than us. And when we step back from our thinking process, it does enable that to come to the fore. There's no doubt about that there is something there. And I think just knowing that is the big wow. So is that our awareness, which is the one, the I am, the pure I am, not this clod of selfishness, the ego I am. No, I'm talking about the I am, just oneness, just awareness, just knowing. Either way, we are evolving, and so I've gone on a bit there, confused myself. I hope I've not confused you too much. This happens as I was just finishing, my thoughts about what I was going to say today. I was listening to sounds of the 60s, and Tony Blackman. I love listening to sounds. It's my age. And he played a Jackie DeShannon number. What the world needs now is love. Wow. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. Da, da, da. And so I just thought, wow, how appropriate. But let's face it, when we look at it, we have got the ability to stand back from this, and that something bigger than us is that love that is there, and that oneness, that awareness is the energy of the universe, which has got intelligence, which is there always having our back. Either way, it's helpful. So I'm sorry if I confused you there. Maybe I've confused myself. I hope that helps. So take care. Know that something's got your back, whatever it is, even if it's an aspect of yourself. So thank you very much and cheerio. See you next time.